Hello and good morning friends, welcome to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, very successfully we are running a series on organizational behavior. A number of lectures have been conducted and are uploaded on YouTube for you so that you can have better access of the lectures. Dear friends, you can give your feedback for the lectures as well as if you want to have a session on particular topic under the series, definitely you can mail us, you can write us. So dear friends, taking the series forward today, we would be talking on one of the most important and very interesting topics, that is violence in the workplace. Now you might be wondering what kind of violence could hamper the workplace. So dear friends, we would like to tell you all that for this discussion we have once again with us in our studios Dr. Namita Rajput. Dr. Namita Rajput is a principal in Sri Aurobindo Evening College, University of Delhi, and she is always here to give answers to your questions, to fulfill your curiosity. Let's welcome our guest, Dr. Namita Rajput, and let's have a deep insight into the topic. Hello ma'am, welcome to the EDISET lecture.
So good morning everyone. Here we have a very interesting topic, that is violence in the workplace. Workplace violence is any physical assault, threatening behavior, verbal abuse occurring in the work setting. So this is definitely a very dangerous situation and it has to be controlled at any cost. A workplace may be any location, either permanent or temporary, where an employee performs any work-related duty. So we must first understand what is a workplace, and second we must understand what is a violence. So workplaces, it could be a temporary place, it could be a permanent place, but definitely it is one of the places where the employee works and he comes on the duty. Now definitely there are so many issues related to why the violence is taking place, what are the factors behind it, who are the heroes and who are the actors behind it. So we must have the complete deep insight of the topic so that we are able to have the deep understanding and make strategies to control the violence in the workplace. Now what is violence? Violence could be any verbal, physical or psychological threat of assault on an individual that has the intention or results in a physical or psychological damage. Workplace is any location where the employees is due to the job requirements. So violence definitely it has many connotations, it has a deep meaning. That is, it could be any verbal aspect, that is you use a rubbish and a wrong language which is called as a violence, like which is not a protocol and which is not definitely accepted at the workplaces. Similarly, it could be a physical thing, that you get physical with somebody in terms of hitting them or something of the actions like this. It could be definitely all these things, they are affecting the psyche of the individual, that is they affect the psychological impact, and definitely it is not a good sign in an organization, because the organizations are not a place of violence, they are a place of work, they are a place of excellence, they are the place of making profits and doing value additions for the organization and for the society as a whole. So if the violence takes place and it is a continuous activity, it is a matter of deep concern for the organization. Now definitely what are the most common occurrences? Let us have a look on this. Insubordination, verbal intimidation, threats, harassment, vandalism, arson, stalking, fist fights. These are the most commonly occurrence of the violence in the workplace, and we will be doing all these in detail as and when we proceed on the lecture. Now there are certain acts of the workplace violence besides this, like we have an aggregated assault, we have a sexual assault, product tampering, sabotage, homicide, acts committed during the robberies. So all these particular words, they have a deep meaning and they have a deep concern, and they have to be checked and they have to be under control, because if these things happen, the workplace is not going to be a workplace, it is going to be a damaging aspect in terms of the physical and the psychological aspect of the individual, where nobody wants to continue and work. Now as far as possible, we should try and avoid the violence in the workplace so that we are able to control it, we are able to sustain it, and we are able to keep away all types of violence. So all the factors which are responsible for the workplace violence, all the persons who are responsible, they have to be deeply studied and they have to be deeply taken into consideration so that it does not become an epidemic. Because if the workplace violence becomes an epidemic, then of course it is very difficult to control this aspect. The Center of Diseases Control says what? A workplace violence has reached the epidemic proportions. There are roughly 1,11,000 violent incidents per year. There are roughly 50 to 1,000 workplace homicides per year. So this statistics which has been given by the Center for Disease, this is very, very alarming. And definitely if these statistics are not taken into considerations and not are baked into the strategy making, then of course we have to face the music, and of course the organization will not be a place to work then. Now, the workplace violence is the second leading cause of death in the workplace overall. Is the leading cause of death in the workplace for females, and 1 out of 20 women will be a victim of a stalker. There are so many issues connected to the workplace violence. One of the prime factor is about the female aspect. There are so many stalkers. They will stalk her on the Facebook and other social media websites. They will have a look on this, that what is she doing, who are she friends with, what are her activities all day around, which route she takes when coming back from home and home to office and all that. So the stalker will take care of all these parameters and will start abusing and start assaulting the female employees, which is definitely not good. Now, as per the statistics which has been given by the Center for Disease Control, that the stalking is of course a major cause of death amongst the female. And definitely it is not at all a good thing, because we are living in a democratic country, a free country in which all people are allowed to move on, freedom of speech is there, etc. But if these things keep on happening, this is not at all good for the society as a whole, because the female is a subdued sex, and of course she should be allowed to do whatever she wants, and the things like stalking and all, they are not morally taken by the society. So it has to be checked in any cost. What causes the violent acts? There is a big question mark on this, and of course the reasons are very, very common. The first is disgruntled employees, that is the unsatisfied employees behind it, the domestic disturbances, and delusion person. These are primarily the major causes for the employees. So we'll do them in detail one by one. So first we will take up the disgruntled employee. The disgruntled employee is one who is always unsatisfied because of his long-term tenure, because of his stressors which are causing violence, and the end of the line. So these are primarily the main causes for a disgruntled employee. And of course, we should try and check this kind of a cause, because this is primarily one of the major reasons for the workplace violence. The second major cause is the domestic disturbances. And of course, the victim of a domestic disturbances is a female in any case, because we have a Indian society in which the females are supposed to play a very stereotype role, in which she is a cook, she is a driver, she is a manager, she is a caretaker, she is a parent, she is in a multifaceted role. And of course, if any of the duties are not complied with in a way it should be, then the domestic violence is bound to happen. And of course, we are human beings, and we are there is a limit to which we can take, and if these things continues, there is a spillover onto the official work also. And of course, we are human beings, we cannot have a watertight compartments of the home and the office. So when the violence spills over into the workplace, it is definitely the major cause behind it is the domestic disturbances. So as a matter of fact, we should all try and change the society, and we should respect the women, and of course the stereotype role which was supposed to be played by the women now should be endorsed to the males also, because we are basically we have the equality in our society also in terms of words only, but when it comes to the practice, we should try and equate the concept of equality into real terms, that is giving due importance to the women and the due importance to the males. So there should not be any kind of discrimination between the type of work she is doing and the type of work the male is doing. The next and a major cause, of course, for the workplace violence is the delusion person. Now, usually the act against what they perceive to be wrong has little or no connection to the organization. So a delusion person is one who is always disorganized, they do not know what to do, and so this could be one of the major reasons for the workplace violence. Now there are definitely number of sources which are responsible for the workplace violence. Let us have a look on this. First is by strangers or vendors, by the co-workers, by the customers, by the contractors, by the acquaintances, and by the relatives. So the sources which we have enlisted here definitely are always connected with the employee and always connected with the person who is involved into the workplace violence. So somewhere there is a deep connection, like vendors, they are connected with the organization, the co-workers are a part and parcel of the organization, the customers, contractors, acquaintance, and the relatives, they are also very known to the employee who is a part of the workplace violence. So these sources have to be really scrutinized in deep and try to find out a reason that why there is a violence at the workplace. Now coming on to very important criteria, that is, what is a profile of a perpetrator, that is a person who does the violence. So there is no set profile of a perpetrator. Perpetrator is one who is, this word is used in a negative term, and definitely he is the one who is actually doing a violence. So we are trying to gauge, is there any profile of that person who is doing a violence? So the question mark is very, very important to be seen and try to infer the answers out of it, that is there any particular profiles? So my answer is that you have to see the patterns and the behaviors and the profiles all together in one frame to find out that who the person is all about. Look for the patterns rather than individual warning signals. This is one aspect which is very, very important to understand the workplace violence. And the second is the profiles may help in identifying the potential problems, but they are not all inclusive or exclusive. So we cannot do much here about the profiling of an individual who is a propagator, that is the person who is doing actually the workplace violence, but we can actually understand and have a deep observation of his behaviors and the patterns, etc., so that we are able to find out that what kind of potential problems are there and how we are able to sort it. Now there are certain indicators of a perpetrator. So let us have a look on this. It could be a male, it could be 30 to 50 years of age, the problem employee, the history of a violent behavior, intimidates the others, possible substance abuse, paranoid, and cannot take any kind of a criticism. So these are primarily, we are talking about the profile and the characteristics of a perpetrator, that it could be most of the time it is male, and the research says and the empirical study says that the ratio of the female employee is very, very less. So most of it, the age is between, there's a big range of 30 to 50 years of age, and of course he's a problem employee. If somebody says anything to him, he cannot take up the criticism at all, and there is a possible characteristics of that person is that he's always agitated, he's always in a bad mood, he's always in a violent behavior, and of course he's a paranoid, that always scared of something or the other. Then of course he always holds a grudges against everyone. Now let us have a look on the signs to look for. He is obsessed with guns and the gun magazines. He is interested in past act of violence. He makes open or weird threats, he is obsessed with the job, and he is a loner. So these are the signs which we look on for a perpetrator, and of course the major characteristics of a perpetrator is that he is a loner, that he always wants to stay alone. Because the kind of the mindset he has, the kind of the thought process he has, nobody is in congruence with that, and he always wants to be alone in this regard, and definitely this is one of the major characteristics of a perpetrator. Now definitely 30 to 40% they commit suicide or suicide by a cop, and there are certain types of incidences which we'll talk about and is very, very famous in this regard. The first is the homicides, that is a leading cause of job related deaths for the women. Second leading cause for men, non-fatal assaults. Over 2 million people have been assaulted at the workplace since 1987 according to the Center of Disease. Now basically when the organization is good, when the environment is good, the workplace violence has got no place in that organization. But as and when we move on to an environment which is uncongenial, which is unfriendly, the workplace violence takes place at a big speed, and in that case the major cause is a homicide. Homicide is a kind of a violence in which you do not have any intentions to kill a person, but yes, you do certain acts in which the person dies, or there is a serious damage onto the health of an individual which he is not able to recover and cope up with. So definitely it is much more in case of a woman than in case of a male. Then we have a non-fatal assault, that is the people do not die, but yes, there is a non-fatal assaults, and about over 2 million of people, again this is the statistics given by the Center of Disease, they have been assaulted at the workplace since 1987, which is a very, very alarming number. And of course, if you see the statistics today, it must have crossed about 100 million. So coming on to the background of this kind of an information, that is, what kind of a violence are we talking about? There are types of violence: physical, verbal and psychological. Now these are the three types of violences which are most important. The first is the physical, that you start fighting with one another. There is a fist fight, there is a pushing of each other, and you start doing physical assault to one another. So this is a stage of uncivilized people working in the workplace. Second is the verbal, that is, you start using abusive language, you are very rude with people, and you are trying to come out with the words which are not accepted by the society at all. And of course then there is a psychological violence, that is, you try to affect the psyche of an individual, you try to damage the inside thought process of an individual, which is against the most damaging aspect, because the physical and the verbal assaults can be checked, whereas the psychological factors, they cannot be checked, because it affects simply and straight the psyche of an individual, which is again a very dangerous sign for the individual to grow and to come back to the original self. Now coming on to the effects, like if you are in a state of a violence, definitely the effects are not positive. The effects are always negative. The first effect is a physical aspect. The second is the psychological and emotional damage. The third is the interruption in business. The next is the higher worker comps cost, the loss of productive workers, the legal liability, the psychological and emotional damage, and the interruption in the business. So the effects which we are talking about here is definitely a negative aspect, and it has to be checked in any case. Like there is a physical damage onto the health of an individual, that he gets some kind of wounds, etc. Then we have a emotional damage, that is, you are emotionally broken because the language and the environment is not at all congenial and unfriendly, which affects the psyche of an individual. Then we have an interruption in the business also, because everything is connected with your thought process and your personality. If you are sad from inside, if you are not good, you are unbalanced from your inside, then of course whatever decisions you take, whatever strategies you adopt, whatever decision making you do is not at all good for the business. So there is a complete aspect of interruption in the business, and the interruption is so high that the decision making and the overall profit scenario and the productive scenario, it goes down the drain. Now coming on to the loss of the productive workers, that is, the people are always engaged in a negative activity, so pulling each other, affecting each other, and they are in a race of damaging, that who's able to damage more. So this kind of a race is again, it is very detrimental to the organization, and it has to be checked at any cost. Then we have a legal liability also, like if you are physically assaulting, or if you are in a state of a homicide, then of course you have to face the legal consequences, because in any case it's a kind of a murder with no intention, but yes, you are into such violent activities that the eventual result is that you are able to put an end to anyone's life. Then we have an emotional damage, which is very difficult to make up again, and of course the overall scenario is a very negative scenario in this case. Now coming on to the risk factors, like the first is isolated work areas, inadequately lighted parking lots, high risk environment, solo or night work, no way to communicate, and financial responsibilities. So here we are talking about the risk factors. Like the violence at the workplace, the people will look for the corners, people will look for the people who are coming out after the work at night places where they will catch hold of them and beat them, etc. And of course they will take away the mobile phones, and there is no way to communicate between one another. And of course they will take into such conditions and positions where there is no light, so that they are not able to identify the persons who are responsible for doing that kind of a work. Now, the nature of the job or responsibility, unrestricted movement in the workplace, the prevalence of handguns and weapons among people, family and guns, the number of acute and chronical ill mental patients being released without follow-up, and the drug abuse. So these are primarily the major risk factors which are out of this workplace violence. So now we'll come on to the risk factors one by one. The first is the verbal threats. That is, you are inflicting bodily harm, include vague and overt threats. Then you have obscene phone calls, which is again very, very bad. Intimidating presence again is very bad. Harassment of any kind of a nature. Like if the people are involved in a workplace violence, these are the risk indicators, and they will actually experience this, which they should not have been, because violence is a complete negative scenario which has to be rooted up in any case. Like you start getting the verbal threats that I will do this, I will take your life, I will hold you against the corners of the organization, and they start calling with the such numbers, like we have IP addresses, and through internet they start calling so that their number is not traceable. And there are number of softwares which are now available that if you pay in dollars you will not be able to give your identity, but yes, the other person gets frightened because of the obscene calls he is getting. Then intimidating presence and harassment of any kind of a nature, they are a part and parcel of the risk factors and the indicators which are the byproducts of the violence in the workplace. Then we have a disorderly conduct, such as shouting, pushing or throwing objects, punching walls, slamming doors, and fascination with guns or other weapons demonstrated by discussions or bringing weapons to workplace. So these are, some of the risk indicators which have to be checked. Like the people who are involved in a workplace violence, they will start using wrong words, they start shouting, howling, they start throwing things on each other, then they push the walls, there is a fist fight, and there are slamming doors. So the people who are a victim of workplace violence, they get threatened. They are very, very scared of this kind of a scenario. Then of course they are the people who are involved in the workplace violence, they are fascinated with the guns. They start bringing the weapons at the workplace. It could be a knife, it could be a rifle, it could be a small gun, so that the people have a fear in mind that if you are going to say anything to this person, he is going to shoot us, or he is going to, use his knife to bring life to an end. So this kind of a scenario is really very, very sad and very, very alarming. Now overall we have seen till now in this part of my lecture is that there are certain workplace factors, there is a workplace violence, and of course we have to see the aspect of the information. So I am going to give you a recap in next 1 or 2 minutes. So the first thing which we talked about, that is there a work violence? The answer is yes. In most of the organization we see this kind of a scenario, that there is a workplace violence in the organizations. It is mainly because of the long-term disgruntled employees, because of the domestic violence, because of the delusion person, and of course the sources from which the workplace violence comes are all the persons who are associated with the organization. It could be a stranger, vendor, co-worker, customer, contractor, acquaintances, and the relatives. And then we talked about, is there any particular profile of a perpetrator? That of course he must be having some peculiar and a special characteristics in this regard. So we said that there are no fixed patterns, but we must understand and observe the patterns he is following, and the profile he is following, and the behavior he is following. So only then we will be able to come out with this, and most of it we have come out with certain factors. Like for example, they are males in most of the cases, and of course they are of age between 30 to 50 years of age. And of course, they are the problem employees. They are not able to take up any kind of a grudges. They are always aggravated. They are always paranoid in their behavior. And of course, they have a strong love for the guns, strong love for the weapons, and they use rowdy language. And of course, it is overall, the past acts of violence also in this regard. So overall, 30 to 40% of the people, they commit suicide by themselves or by the cops. And the types of incidences which we narrated in this part was homicides, not factual assaults of an individual. Of course, the physical and the mental health is affected in this ratio. And of course, there are certain verbal threats, obscene calls which they start getting, the harassment of any kind of a nature. Then of course, they start shouting, howling and pushing walls and slamming doors. And they start using weapons and start getting it at the workplace, so that they are able to create an environment of a threat, which is again not good for the organizations. So as a matter of fact, we must say no to violence, and of course the workplace, we should take work as worship, not as a violent place. Thank you so much. So now we are discussing about the early warning signals of violence at workplace, that what are the particular signs which we should take care, so that we are able to detect that there is a kind of a violence which has been started and it has to be nipped in the bud. So usually we follow a trigger such as follows: the statement of unfair treatments. Like the people who are a part and parcel of the organizations, they are not fair with these statements, they start using unfair statements. And of course, the people who are in the race of the promotion, etc., they are forced to wait. They are forced to, say no to their promotions. And of course, they show the signs of the mental instability. They start to isolate themselves, that is, they become the loner. And of course, they start to isolate themselves and have recently been disciplined. So these are the warning signals which has to be checked right from the beginning, and if you see any of this kind of a signal, it has to be nipped in the bud. Why? Because all these things are important to understand that the organization is not a place to fight and a place of violence. It is a place of productivity, it is a place of worship, it is a place of work. So all the points have to be taken care of. If you see the early signals, like the people start isolating themselves, they start becoming a loner. And of course, from the history says that they are not at all disciplined, and now they are becoming disciplined in the recent past. So there has to be something, fishy about it, that they are not their usual self. And of course, they show certain signs of instability, which is not good for the organization at all. So these were the early signals which have to be scrutinized, analyzed, and have to be rationally judged, so that we are able to catch up with the organization's problems. Now there are certain common traits, like the history of violent behavior, it includes the arrest and the police contracts. It's a middle-aged white male upsetting with the having only the low-level tracks, bitter and unhappy, no job security, problems growing up, and the substance abuse. Now there are certain common traits which has to be checked in this case. That is, you have a history of a violent behavior, like the people have already been arrested, or definitely there is a police contact in this case. And of course they are the middle-aged people between 30 to 50 years of age, and upset with having only low levels task, and because they are so upset about their job profiles that they start showing the signs of problem in the organization, because the kind of profile they are looking for in the organization, they are not getting it, and they are very bitter and unhappy with their approach. They are not seeing any kind of a job security, and of course the problems are magnifying and growing up, or they are mushrooming, and there is a substance abuse, which is again a common this thing. Now we are coming on to the personality traits which have to be gauged upon. First is the low self-esteem, low productivity, low impulse control, lacks empathy, social withdrawal, the feelings of rejection, resisting of change, feeling of being picked up, easily frustrated, and the challenges authority. So we are talking about the perpetrator who is responsible for the violence at the workplace. That individual has got a peculiar personality or a personal characteristics which are as follows. That is, the first is there is a low self-esteem, that they do not have any kind of an ego or self-actualization need, and if you see the productivity or what they are showing for the organization is very, very low, and there is a low impulse control in this regard, and they are not empathetic in their characteristics, because they are, had been there been empathy, they would not have been engaged themselves into any kind of this activity, and they start withdrawing from the society very slowly. So there is a social withdrawal in this case, and they always feel rejected, that they are not the persons who are welcomed in the organization, and they will always resist any kind of a change which the organizations want them to change, or they have a feeling of picked up, and they are very, very frustrated in their approach, and they always will challenge the authority. That is, they will always have this kind of a feeling that they are not at all good, and they will start showing their own this thing, that we do not want to accept any kind of an authority for the organization. So the feeling of rejection, resisting of control, feeling of being picked up, easily frustration, and the challenges, they are the personality traits of that perpetrator who is responsible for violence at the workplace. And of course, what to look for if you are into this kind of a state, what all things you have to look for. The first is the obsessive behavior. The second is the increased absenteeism. The third is the chemical dependency. Fourth is the verbal threats or threatening acts, and the history of the discipline problems. So if an individual is engaged in a workplace violence, so there are certain things which we have to look upon, like for example the behavior of an individual which is obsessive in nature. He is not coming to the office regularly, and there is a constant rise in his absenteeism, followed by the chemical dependency, and he starts using the threatening language, or there are threatening acts in this regard, and they are not following any kind of a discipline in that organization. So these are one of the major factors which you have to see and look for when you are into a workplace violence. What else can we look for? That he is in a state of a depression and isolation. There is always a defensiveness. There is an emotional outburst, interest in the weapons, self-destructive behavior, and affiliation with the gangs. Now, the people who are engaged in the workplace violence, one thing you have to be very clear about, that they start misbehaving in that workplace. They start loving the guns or the weapons. They start bringing it to the workplace. They are not bothered at all about their misconduct. They are always using misbehavior and mislanguage, which is again not good for the organization. and slowly and steadily they become defensive. They are isolated in their organization, or maybe in a first stage of a depression they go. Then they start affiliating themselves with the gangs, so that the people are always frightened with those kind of people who are affiliated with the gangs, because they are known by the gangs or the company they are keeping. So all these factors have to be looked upon when there is a workplace violence in the office. Now, of course, you have to look for, we have in detail discussed about the workplace violence, the factors, the profile of a perpetrator, the effects of a workplace violence. Now, coming on to that, what is the solution? The most important part of the lecture is that what kind of a solution you can think about, and how we can control a situation of workplace violence. So now we are coming on to the conflict resolution, that if you feel that there are conflicts all around, there is an uncongenial atmosphere all around, so what we have to look for, we have to look for the strategies to control the environment. So what we can do, a big question mark again. First, provide job skills training to them, so that whenever they have a fear of that they are at a very low level, so if we start giving them the skills, they are up on the hierarchy, and they are given a better job profile. And of course the kind of the problems or the mindsets they have, they get wiped off very easily, because now they are placed well higher in the hierarchy of the organization, and they have become a more important part of the organization. The second is that if at all you are not able to endorse the skill training to them, and they are not able to ride up to the the hierarchical level of the organization, this is one most of the important solution. But the second aspect is that you should always give them some kind of counseling sessions. That of course going on to a wrong path, going always on a path of a violence is not at all good, because the violence is something which has got no and should not have any place in that organization. So if you give them some kind of a counseling session and give them all the positive things about the organization, if you start showing the other part of the field to them, so there is a possibility that they are not continuing with your violent activities. Then is a security officer's role is also one of the major solutions for the conflict resolution. That is, as the security officers do, what they do is they educate the people, they listen to them, and they work with the management. So these are the three important aspects. That is, ELW is one of the major strategies to resolve the conflicts at the workplace, and we are at peace, and the environment which will be prevailing in that organization after the conflicts are resolved and the violence is not accepted, is that you have to educate the people, you have to give them complete insights about the violence, you have to listen to their grievances, because unless and until their heart is clear and they have a place to talk about, then of course it is not good for them. And then of course they have to work with the management, because now they are having a complete insight of what, here, where, what and how. Now we have discussed till now that is the conflict resolution strategies. The first thing which we can do is that is we have to give them a skill training so that they are in a better profile positions, and then we have to give them certain counseling sessions, and then we have to play a role of a security officer. The role of the security officer is to educate them, to listen to them, so that they are able to work with the management activities. And of course now coming on to a very different strategy for the conflict resolution is that a supervisor's role. Now you have to be prepared to listen to your employee concerns. That is, unless and until you listen to their problems, they will not be clear from their heart, and they will always be negative about the organization. That this is one aspect which is ignored always. Then you have to notify the human resources of a potential problem. Then you have to notify the security employees of a potential problem. So here you must have seen that a role of a supervisor can also help in the conflict resolution. How the supervisor will take care of this role is to listen to what employees have a problem. That is, they will deeply take care of their insight of the problem. Then of course after listening to them and the employee concerns, they will come on to the major issues of that this is the problem and this is how the potential problems can arise further. So you have to check on that, you have to actually be a supervisor in this case so that the conflicts are resolved to the best possible extent. Now coming on to the next resolution strategy, that is you have to prepare a resource plan. Analyze the past incidents. You have to assess the potential for the violence. You have to assess the preparedness. Now in this regard, you have to be very particular about the conflict resolution. That is, unless and until you understand the past, you cannot build a future. So you have to gauge the past activities, that why, what happened, what were the reasons behind it, who were the actors, and what were the major causes for the violence. So if you have a base of everything, then of course you can analyze the present situation in a better perspective. Then you have an assess the potential for the violence, that on what pretext the violence can go up. Then you have to assess that whether we are prepared for resolution or not. So you have to see the preparedness level, you have to see the past incidents, you have to prepare for the potential violence also, so that you are able to have a best strategy for the conflict resolutions. Then you have to develop a response team. This is again a very important conflict resolution strategy. That is the employee assistant personnel, medical professionals, the law enforcement, guard force and the legal force and the local police. Now when you talk about the response team, it is very important because we will be able to catch up with the conflicts resolution very quickly. Like if the employee assistance personnel is appointed, then his role is majorly to listen to what kind of problems are they facing. If they need any kind of a medical thing, then you must have the medical professionals with them. If they're facing with some kind and struggling with the legal issues, then you have the law enforcement and the guard force and the police force. So overall, this is a response team which are there to address to the problems of the employees, so that the potential violence which is likely to grow and crop up, they are nipped in the bud. Now, don't let workplace violence become an epidemic. This is a very important message which everyone has to look for, because if it is becoming an epidemic, or if it becomes an epidemic, then of course nobody can help you and your organization will become titanic and it has to drown in any case. Now coming on to certain safety tips, that is in this regard, that is I will discuss here certain do's and certain don'ts. Now do's, first, secure your workplace daily. Move your vehicle if working late. Escort all visitors, vendors in the workplace. So these are important aspects of what you have to do in terms of resolution of the workplace violence. Then you have to be very aware of your surroundings, that who is coming, why is he coming, know where you exit are, you implement a buddy system, you leave with the keys in hand, you consider the workplace layouts. So this is basically the awareness of an individual about knowing yourself and your surroundings, because the more vigilant you are, the more careful you are, these are the kind of a safety pins and the safety tips which can protect the workplace violence. Then of course you have to maintain the ability to communicate. You have to report all the incidents which are taking place. You have to inform the management of any kind of restraining orders which the employees are not taking care of, or they are not listening to these orders. So these are the few tips which you have to be very particularly taking care of. That is the do's we have discussed. Now we are coming to do nots, that what we should not be doing. So the first thing which is important and the things to remember as far as the do not list is concerned, or the don'ts are concerned, are as follows. The first is, do not get physical. That is, in any case, if anything goes wrong, you should not be engaging yourself in any kind of a physical assault. The second is, do not overreact. That is, stay cool, stay calm should be your approach. If you are overreacting, people will also overreact, and there is an action and a counter reaction, and eventually you will have more violence in the organization. Then you should not take the challenge. You should be a good listener, and of course you should know what is really being said, rather than on the surface of it try to be in the depth of it, try to analyze, put in your brains, put in your logic and reasoning that why did it happen. Now of course if the situation is becoming worse and there is workplace violence going around, then you have to be very importantly knowing that you have to give them a space, that is a proper distance between the place of happening and you. It is better you should leave that place. You should give an ample space in this regard, so that if you are out of the scene, the things will always be under control. Then you have to watch what you say non-verbally. You have to be a reference, that is the self-interest, and you have to speak of the consequences, not of the threats. So overall you have to be very positive in your approach, you have to be very vigilant in your approach, you have to be very careful in your approach, you have to be thoughtful in your approach, you do not have to be verbal in terms of speaking wrong things or rubbish things or a rowdy language, because all these things they aggravate the situation and the workplace violence can also go up. So as a matter of fact, you can play a very significant and pivotal role. That is, you have to actually recognize the warning signals. You have to always stay in control. You have to collect the information. You have to report all the incidents which are taking place in the organization, which are specifically in the cases of insubordination, the cases of a problem. So if you recognize the signals, it is very, very important, because you will start making the strategies accordingly. Then if you stay in the control, that is, you are not going haywire, you have to collect the information which is responsible for the violence, and of course you have to report all the incidents to the management so that they are able to take a timely action in this regard. And in all cases you have to protect yourself, because unless and until you protect yourself, nobody else will come for your protection. So there are certain things which are very important to protect yourself, which are as follows. The first is, don't let the employee know a meeting is scheduled. Have something else with you. Include positives and the negatives during the evaluation. Never attack an employee or insults or yelling. Then always remain calm when you talk. Keep a good safe distance between yourself and the employee. Make sure that the security can be easily reached. Stay close to the doors. So these were the important do's and don'ts situations which have to be actually addressed, and if you address them, if you follow them, the workplace violence can be under control. Now certain myths and realities have to be talked about. So let us have a look on this. Certain myths versus reality. People just snap. Violence and threats are irrational. Current and the former co-worker pose the greatest risk of workplace violence. Research studies have established the profile of perpetrators of violence at the work. The mental illness is the most significant risk factor for violence. The main issue is threat assessment is on whether an actual threat has been made. It will never happen to us. It will definitely happen to us. These situations are best handled by a single person. So as a matter of fact, you have to be very careful about what is happening, what is not happening, what are the factors responsible for the workplace violence, and how you can always control it. So unless and until you have a real insight of the workplace violence and the basic factors and the actors who are responsible for this, you will not be able to have and play a pivotal role in controlling and checking the workplace violence. So as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you again a recap of a complete lecture which was there in the first part as well as there in the second part, so that you are able to have the overall points in one frame. We talked about the workplace violence. First, the workplace is one which is a temporary or a permanent in nature, where the employee performs their activities. Violence is any kind of physical assault or a threatening behavior or wrong language occurring in the work settings. Then we came on to a definition of a violence and a workplace, which we have discussed already. Now there are certain most common occurrences which are importantly have to be understood. That is a case of insubordination, that is the superior is saying certain things to the subordinate and the subordinate is not able to follow those rules and the regulations. There is a verbal intermediation, there are threats, there are harassments, there are homicides, there is a vandalism, there is an arson, there is a stalking and there is a fist fight. So overall we talk about the power play which is taking a form of any of these things. It could be an aggravated assault, it could be a sexual assault, it could be a product tampering, it could be a sabotage, it could be a homicide, and of course the acts committed during the robberies. So all these things have to be checked under control, and as a matter of fact everyone should try to make workplace not as an epidemic, because an epidemic is very difficult to be controlled. It should be in fact nipped in the bud. That is, if you see the signs of the violence in the beginning, you should try and catch them very quickly. Then of course we talked about certain statistics which is given by the Center for Disease Control. It says that the first major cause for a women death or a female death is a workplace violence, and a second cause for the male death. So it is so important and grave that we have to check it, we have to find out the strategies to control it, and of course the persons who are a victim of the workplace violence, they also have to be heard so that we are able to strategize and control the workplace violence. Then we have to find out the basic reasons for why the workplace violence occurs. It could be disgruntled employees, that is always an unsatisfied employees because of their long tenure, working hours, not being heard, and it could be end of a line or a less authority, etc. It could be a domestic disturbances which has a strong spillover onto the professional life. It could be a disillusioned person who himself is not taking care of himself, and he's not very having strong convictions of what he has to do. Then the sources from which the workplace violence comes is a round of persons who are associated with you always, like for example the strangers or the vendors, the co-workers, the customers, contractors, acquaintances and the relatives. So now we talk about one major question, that is there any particular profile of a perpetrator? So the answer is yes, you have to see the patterns, behavior, and deeply understand that why is he behaving in X way or the Y way. So overall we came out with certain characteristics that normally they are male, and normally they are middle aged, between 30 to 50 years of age, and they have a strong love for the guns, they have a strong love for the instruments which are definitely dangerous in nature, and they cannot take the criticism. They are always paranoid about their convictions, and of course they have to see the signs to look for. They always look for a certain obsessed, and they always want to be alone, or they have to be a loner in this case. So most of the people, they commit suicide, 30 to 40% either by himself or by the cops. Then we have another interesting types of incidents which take place in the workplace violence is a homicide. Homicide is a kind of a violent act in which a person dies, not because of the intention but because of the strong hitting by an individual, or by using a wrong language, or by pushing them onto the ground, or something or the other happens but the person dies. But here we are not talking about the intentions. The intention is not to kill but be violent about it. Then we have a non-fatal assaults which are again bad, and the violence could be of physical nature, it could be of verbal nature, it could be of psychological nature. So out of the three, the psychological aspects, they are most difficult, and because it is very difficult to catch again the psyche of an individual, because it is very, very bad to come back to the same situation as it was there before the violence. Then we have certain negative effects of the workplace violence, like there's a strong interruption in the business, there is an emotional damage, there is an interruption in terms of the productive workers, there is a productive loss of time, and of course the people are isolated, they are obscene, they start getting obscene calls from the individual. These are the indicators of the workplace violence. There are verbal threats which come to you, there is an harassment always, there is a disorderly conduct of an individual, and of course they have a strong fascination for the guns, that is they start bringing it to the workplace. Now what are the early signals which are most important to be talked about? Like for example, the person suddenly becomes disciplined, or there is a statement of unfair treatments, or they show signs of mental instability, or they start abusing people, So all these things, they are very, very common to understand that this is the starting point of the workplace violence. So we should be, the people start getting a feeling of rejection, or they are frustrated always, and they always have the grudges against the organization. So or they are emotionally disturbed, and they are self-destructive. So what we have to do is we have to resolve these conflicts. We have to give them some kind of a guidance, some kind of counseling sessions. We have to give them some kind of a job skills training, because they are always they always have this kind of a fear that they are always at a low part of the hierarchy. So if you give them and impart them some good skill sessions, so they are promoted onto the upper level of the hierarchy, and of course the kind of a dissatisfaction is uprooted there and then, because now they are promoted on a good position. And sometimes you have to be acting like a security officer, that is, you have to educate them, you have to listen to them, and then they are able to work with the management. You have to play a supervisory role, and of course you have to have a response team with them, and you should always try and have certain do's and don'ts, that is which have been discussed in detail. That is, you have to listen to them, communicate with them, come out with the potential problems are they having, and of course you have to be a good listener, because unless and until they throw out whatever they have, or an emotional outburst is there, they will not be able to come out with the good things. So you have to remember all the warning signals, you have to collect the information, you have to gauge them together, and then take a decision making. So I hope the session was enlightening for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us one of the most productive sessions once again. And dear friends, we believe that you should keep writing to us. You should keep asking questions. So if you have any query, do write to us at info.cc@nic.in. And very soon we are going to meet again. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.